Believe me, I know from recent personal experience what a difficult moment this is for all of us. But since we don't have much time, I am going to ask quickly, but stay in the moment of difficulty. I think in the best of times, getting a movie started, raising the money is a challenge. Given the subject matter and given who the film's about, did you encounter any kind of climate of resistance to making this? Was it hard to get it going, or was the climate right to tell this story?
Yes, it was not so easy to make a film about such a subject. You know, it's not very bankable to make a film about pedophilia, even in France. So it was, yes, a big deal to convince the producer and the financiers in France. But some people were very touched by this story, which was a big scandal in France. And the film was not very expensive, so we found enough money to make it. But we decided to shoot the film secretly because it was impossible to shoot in Lyon, saying what was the film about. So we have to lie about the title of the film. It was not called By the Grace of God, but it was called Alexander. And I said to the press, oh, it's a friendship between three men who were very close when they were young, and that's all. So we were totally quiet, and we had the freedom to make what we wanted during the shooting, and we decided to shoot all the interiors of the church in Belgium, because it was impossible to shoot in Lyon, because we would have had to ask to Cardinal Barbarin the permission, so it was impossible.
And I imagine I may be speaking for lots of people in the audience to issue some compliments. As you probably know, François wrote the screenplay as well as directing it. And when I thought about the script for this, that it's telling such a huge collective story, but has to be filtered through very particular individual versions of that story, even shifting abruptly that the protagonist we're with for a while is suddenly not the person at the center of the movie, and yet we never lose anybody. And that it has to feel like this process is so painstakingly, frustratingly slow for the characters, but for us, I think this movie moves really quickly. So just as a writing challenge, and maybe later as an editing challenge too, can you talk about how you balanced all those different imperatives?
You know, sometimes reality is stronger than fiction. You know, I didn't have to invent anything, because it happened really like that. You know, it was a kind of relay race between different characters, especially between Alexander and François, the two first characters. Alexander first was alone. He began the fight alone, and after a while, when he realized the church would never move, he decided to go to the police, and then there was an investigation. They discovered François, and François created the association, and then 70 other victims testified. So I had just to follow the real story. After, for me, it was, yes, a big challenge, because usually in a film, after 45 minutes, a character doesn't disappear, except in Psycho of Hitchcock, but it was not this kind of story. So it was the challenge. I didn't know if it would work, if the audience will follow the film and accept the fact one character disappear and after he will be back. But it was the idea to try that. I had not in mind other film with this kind of construction. I had more in mind some series. You know, sometimes there is each episode on one character.
Mm-hmm. And I'm going to ask two more questions, and then I'm going to turn it over to you all, so think about your questions. Having asked that big picture question about the writing, one thing that I've associated with your movies across your career is that you always seem interested in the complications of people, their contradictions, their weaknesses, and I think this film, you managed to do that even with the characters we're rooting for. Whether it's in such a substantial moment as being so sympathetic during an interview and then seeing a domestic violence incident between that same character moments after, or I remember my breath catching when Tristan is calling in the middle of the night and saying, I've never told anybody this story, it's so hard, and the wife is saying, put it on speakerphone, and he does it, which seemed like such an infraction. So, and we end with this dinner scene where actually nobody agrees with each other. So can you talk about trying to make these characters complicated and human and flawed, even as they are the sort of noble crusaders in the story?
During the investigation I've made, you know, I met all these people and I realized it was not black and white. Everything was complex. and it was very interesting. And I decided to focus on the families. You know, it's really my subject. You know, I wanted to show that a child abuse is a ticking time bomb, which damage all the family, all the people around. And so I met the parents of each one, of each victim, the children, the brothers, sisters, and it gave me many informations and a very good material for a script. And I had not to invent anything because I discovered so many secrets. For example, Alexander's wife told me it was the first time she told to someone what happened to her. You know, she was abused as a child. And her children didn't know, so I was very moved. You know, she told me that, and I asked her, can I use that for the film? Because I think it's very important to understand why your couple is so strong. You know, why you support so much your man in this fight. And she said, okay, but just change some small things in the story. So I did it, and so each time I met these people, I had so strong moments with them. So I felt very responsible to make them happy of the result of the film.
And then my last question before turning to the audience. If you know François' work, and I'm sure many of you do, you know that it's hard to say anything that's true of one film that's true for the others. He's quite eclectic and versatile. If there's one thing I do associate with your movies, it's often been challenging us and pushing the envelope about how desire can work, what it can prompt somebody to do. So for me watching this film, to see someone who's been such a poet of adventurous sexuality and taboo breaking declare a bright line and say, that is not the same as this is wrong, was really powerful that it was coming from you specifically. But I wonder, does this film feel different to you from your others, or do you feel like you're asking questions that are in the other movies you've made?
It's the first time I make a film about something real, so of course it's different, but at the end it's the same work. The big difference for me was maybe the consequences of the film, because after the release of the film in France, many things happened. You know, the priest was defrocked, and I think it was a little bit because of the film. The cardinal was condemned. Many commissions were created to fight against the pedophilia in the church. So many things changed in France after the film. So, you know, very often the journalists ask the director, do you think cinema can change the world? And everybody say no, except the very pretentious directors. But I have to confess, in the case of this film, it did really change something. So I'm very proud of that, and it was a big surprise for me. Thank you. But it was not my goal first.
So I'm going to scan the audience. I'm looking at the back of the room, but I see a hand right here already. Yep, you, sir. So if you didn't hear the question, it's about, does the film feel like it's against religion? Or does that just happen to be the institution in which these crimes have been perpetrated?
I hope the film is more complex than that. I don't have a message, you know, I'm not a politician. I just show a situation, and I decide to end the film with a question, you know, so it's up to you to give the answer. So as an artist, I don't want to tell you what's wrong, of course I'm in the point of view of the victim, I'm with the victim, but I think the real question at the end of the film should be, Dad, do you still believe in the institution? Because faith and institution are different things. And of course, the film is a condemnation of the system of the church, how they cope all these things. But it's up to you. You know, I let you the freedom to think what you want at the end of the film.
In the back, in the black?
Yes. Yes, it did happen. François was apostased. I don't know how you say that in English.
An apostate. Mm-hmm.
Yes. And Emmanuel did it too, but Alexander is still in the church. Yes. But it was very interesting to see all these men who suffered the same thing. They have a different way of surviving, and so it was very interesting to see that.
Saw a hand right here. So he mentions the number of these crimes that have already been documented in Illinois and uses that as a way to ask, do we know how widespread statistically, or how much do we know about the number of cases in France?
It's huge in France too. Alas, yes, it's the same thing, I think.
Are they still continuing to prosecute?
Yes, yes. No, they didn't meet them before the shooting. It was a decision we had together. They wanted really to create some character. So I told them many things because, of course, I spent many times with the survivors. But I gave them my feelings about them, and we use that to create each character. And they met at the premiere. And it was very touching, to see them together. François was a little bit upset because he said to me, you should have cast an actor less big, less fat. But for the others, it was okay. I think they were a little bit disturbed because, the story is very closed. It happened in 2014 and 16, so it was disturbing for them, and they were very afraid of the reactions of their family. And actually, everything went well. Even the Alexander's mother, who is not very nice in the film, she thought the film was wonderful. So, it's the power of cinema. When you see your life on a big screen, you're always happy, even if you are a bad guy.
There's a hand over here in the corner.
So I'm going to reverse translate here. So thank you very much for this fantastic movie. I wanted to know if through your work you had you were on the receiving end of pressures such as the one we kind of see in the movie.
During the shooting, no, because it was secret. But when people discovered the real title and when they saw the trailer, the problems began. So the lawyers of the priest tried to stop the release of the film. So it was a big issue. We had many problems, and 2 days before the release, we didn't know if it could be released. Fortunately, the French judge decided that in the case of this film, the freedom of creation was more important than the presumption of innocence. So the film was released. And actually, the film was very successful in France because the Catholics came massively to see the film because they thought the film was honest and it was not against the religion but more about the institution. And many Catholics are upset of this situation. They want that the hierarchy change all these problems.
And I'll ask, because it's connected to those legal issues perhaps, or the issue of libel that comes up a couple times in the movie, but also as a creative decision, I'm thinking about the flashbacks and how much we do and do not see of what has gone on in the past. And did you always know that this was the amount of the past you wanted us to see, or did you film more than you used?
It was a big question, the flashback. What do we show, what we don't show? Of course, it was impossible to show the act of the abuse. It was impossible. But speaking with all the survivors, all the victims, I realized very often people around them don't understand how it happened. They didn't understand. As a child, very often you're tetanized, paralyzed in front of the adult. You don't understand what's happening. So it was important to show that the child are like lambs go
to the slaughter.
Yes, to the wolf. No, and so it was, I think, important to see this man of 40 years old, to show them how they were as a child and how they believed in this priest who was very charismatic, and they didn't understand what was really happening.
Looking at the side of the room that I have over my shoulder, I don't want to ignore you if there are any questions over here, but seeing none, I'll go back here. So the question is about the difference between telling a story that really existed and pre-existed versus telling a story that's completely of his own invention, like Dans la Maison, in the house you mentioned. How do those processes differ? Do you have more control when it's something that you devised in your own imagination?
I felt more responsible. I didn't want to betray them. And when I do an adaptation, it's easier because very often the people I had adapted were dead, so I had no problem. In the case of this film, I wanted to to how to say that in j'avais envie de me mettre derrière, de les mettre en avant.
I wanted to take the back seat in that case. I wanted them to be in front of me in the creative process.
So the question is about the number of scenes where somebody almost subliminally or overtly recognizes somebody else and realizes what happened to you happened to me, and was it conscious to include so many such scenes?
I realize you have to be very brave to speak out. And very often I've realized that people who are able to speak out, it arrives very late in their life, you know. Alexander was able to speak out when he was 40 years old, and it was too late because the statute of limitation at this time were 20 years after his majority. And very often people who are under 30, it's quite impossible for them to speak out. Maybe things are changing now, but during a very long time, you know, and sometimes I've met some people, you know, of 70 years old who told me, I've never said anything, and today I'm able to speak out. So that's why it's very important that the law change. I don't know how is it here in Chicago. I've understood in each state it's different with the statute of limitation, but it's you have really to understand that to speak out it's a big choice, because it's, of course, it can help you, but at the same time, it can destroy many things around you, and that's what I wanted to show in the film.
So loosely on the theme of speaking out and also using your voice to make change in the world, this is a film that's already opening in the States this weekend on the coasts. So it is not too early to use your phone, use your computer, tell people to see it. You know, with this kind of subject matter, we've probably all felt, this sounds like a great film, but am I ready? Am I comfortable? Can I do it? Help people that you know that they need to see this. In 3 weeks, it'll be at our beloved Music Box here in the city. So please spread the word. And thank François so much for this movie.